Welcome to the University of Colorado Boulder. We're here in the Mabel Van Duzy room, which is one of our excellent classrooms in the Norland Library. Part of my goal for this MOOC is to show you that not only are comic books capable of containing many ideas, but at the same time, there are many different kinds of people who think very deeply about comic books. So of course, the creators of comic books think about them and the publishers of comics, but there are academics and there are educators who also think about comic books. Comic books contain a universe, but they reach out to our own world as well, and they inspire people to do exciting work. One of those people is with me here today, Barry Barrows. Barry is a teacher at Centaurus High School in Lafayette, Colorado, really just a stone's throw from where we sit right here. Barry's an award-winning teacher, and he's developed over the past couple years a high school course on comic books and graphic novels. So I thought at the start of this course, when we're just beginning to think about the educational potential of comics, I should bring Barry in and have him explain what he does in his own classroom to you. So I want to thank Barry. Thank you for coming, for joining us in this MOOC. And I want to jump right in and ask you, why teach comics?
Well, William, it's delightful to teach comic books and graphic novels. Really, at the end of the day, all teaching and learning is about the transmission of knowledge. And there's lots of different ways to communicate knowledge, whether it's through music or math or poetry. There's different symbol systems that are used. And comic books is just another set of symbols that's used to transmit knowledge. Different people have different strengths. People have different learning abilities. And we all know some people who really learn well with music and the system of symbols that go with music. Other people learn better with math. But it's all about the transmission of knowledge. Well, with comics, that is about the unique blend of words and pictures, and that helps a lot of people learn.
So I want to jump in here right away. And I want to play devil's advocate a little bit with you, Barry. Certainly, your point about knowledge is well taken. But there are certain kinds of literature, Shakespeare, Dickens, Hemingway. When you teach comics, aren't you neglecting those other kinds of literature that are already recognized as knowledgeable?
Well, one would think so, but first let's remember that this class is an elective class, and so it's not taking the place of those things. It's just another choice. And when you learn about how knowledge can be transmitted through comics, it's more about just reading the world. What is it that we can all learn by looking at the blend of words and pictures? Something that Hemingway doesn't particularly offer. Admittedly, Shakespeare does in a different medium. I love to teach Shakespeare because that too is a blend of words and pictures, images, because it's to be staged. Any teacher of Shakespeare knows full well that you have to stage it to really learn it. And that's a valid form.
That's an interesting point about Shakespeare being visual. How does Shakespeare's visual nature, or drama's visual nature, or film's visual nature for that matter, differ from the visual nature of comic books?
Oh, well, quite significantly. Mainly because comics are a static medium. You have still pictures, and that gives you the opportunity to pause, to reflect, to daydream, much as you do when you're reading a book. With film, that's more of a social experience, the way that we've turned it. Yeah, if you're watching a movie at home, you can stop and pause it, but people don't usually do that. And if you're in the theater, you don't have that option, and certainly with live drama, you don't.
I'm sorry to keep butting in, but a lot of what you're saying is interesting to me, and it makes me think, well, what does he really mean by that? So you said daydream. Isn't daydreaming bad when you're studying a piece of literature?
Absolutely not. It's what you should be doing, because when you're reading something and you're taking in the information that's been given to you by this author, a requirement is for you to interpret it and to try to understand what it is that this person is telling you. And you have to have this moment of quiet. We talk a lot about how we're at our most creative when we're in the shower, when we sort of just let go. And it's because that's when our creative juices are not engaged in something already. And then new combinations of ideas can come together. That's what reading should be, where you're able to stop and pause and reflect and interpret what it is that you're reading. Comics, even though it uses pictures and images, and you think, oh, all this information is being presented to you already, so therefore you don't have to have an imagination to enjoy it, that's not the case at all. The way that you look at the picture and the way that you read the words still requires a great imaginative process as you blend them together.
What's an example of that? Talk to me about how the individual mind blends together the words and the images. How do you communicate that to a 15-year-old kid or a 16-year-old kid who really would rather be watching, if he's going to deal with comics, The Avengers as a movie?
Well, The Avengers started as a comic book, of course, and that's where the creativity of it really, came into being. But, well, Scott McCloud, the writer of a book called Understanding Comics, which I actually use as the textbook in the class, does a wonderful job of explaining comics using the comic format. He knows full well that you can't fully explain all these things without demonstrating it. And he talks about how every picture that you look at in a comic book probably uses one of about 6 or 7 different word-picture combinations. He talks about word-specific, for instance, where all the information that's transmitted is pretty much through the words. The picture is there just kind of as a redundancy. Or maybe there's picture-specific, where the main information is communicated through the picture. The words, rather needless. Of all the different combinations that he comes up with, the one that I think is truly at the heart of good comic storytelling is one that he calls the interdependent panel. And the interdependent panel is one where you have to have both the picture and the words in order to fully understand what's going on and to have a more round and fuller interpretation. I'll give you an example, and it's one that he happens to use in his book. It just serves as a good example. A picture of a woman talking on a telephone, and while she's speaking, you see tears rolling down her cheeks. She says, "I'm so happy for you." Now, based on the context, you would probably be able to guess whether these were tears of joy or whether they were tears of sadness, showing that she didn't really believe what she was saying. However, either way, you're bringing the information that you're getting from the picture and the information that you're getting from the words in order to interpret a meaning about what's really going on. And it's rather instantaneous, much more instantaneous even than in prose, where all of this would have to be somewhat explained to you.
Though it's interesting, you're right about in some stories, it is instantaneous. You read the words, you see the picture, and you follow the plot along. In more complex stories, when we slow down in what you termed a moment of quiet, we can begin to appreciate the ambivalence in that situation. That woman that we're imagining, she might be crying both because she's happy and sad. Right. Imagine if she was hearing that her sister is marrying the man she loves, right? She is happy and sad. And if we speed along and don't allow ourselves that moment of quiet, or what you said, daydreaming, we don't engage our own imagination. You talked about interdependence very articulately. And there's an interdependence between images and words, but maybe we could triangulate that and say it's images, words, and reader as well.
Oh, absolutely. The reader brings his or her own experiences to the process, and that's key. The philosopher Michel de Montaigne once said, "The word is half his who speaks it, half his who hears it," implying that no one ever really completely communicates effectively. Really, communication is about taking the knowledge in one head and putting it into somebody else's head. We like to think we do a pretty good job of that. Frankly, we never really completely fully do it. As much as you want to try to say, this is what I think, and you explain yourself to death, people don't really ever completely see things the way you do. We all live in our own heads. The beauty of language, the beauty of art, the beauty of the humanities is that we're able to some degree, share the ideas at least as much as we're able. Think of where we would be without them. Comics is another form for doing this. Putting words and pictures together in this way, unlike film or drama, is a powerful, overlooked, really very historically underanalyzed way of doing this. And it's high time that we did look at it more. And it's very, very important that we recognize the strong role of interpretation here. The reader is a key part of it. You bring your own experiences to the story that's happening, and there's a range of interpretation. The idea is that the writer, the creator of the story, has some ideas they want you to get, but You know, if you bring your own experience and it's a little bit different, that's probably okay. Could it be wrong? Could it be outside their range? Yeah. Our goal, a good communicator is one who can get you to at least be within the range.
So, very articulately said, Barry. What comics do you teach?
Oh, well, I love all the books that I teach. I wish I could teach even more. But there's a few little short things that I'll do, of course, throughout the semester. There's Marvel Comics has the Fantastic Four, issue number 51, This Man, This Monster. It's a wonderful story that really questions the role of the hero and the villain and how they can blur together. I like to teach Peanuts comic strips because Charles Schulz is just a master of both tone and pacing, and it's a wonderful way to teach those techniques. Political cartoons are great for just the idea of satire and irony, key skills that people should have. Those are some of the shorter works. For longer things, well, I mentioned Understanding Comics before, and that's the textbook for the class. I also like to teach a book called Dropsy Avenue by Will Eisner, who's considered a great in the industry. The awards for like the Oscars or the Tonys in the whole comic book industry are called the Eisner Awards. Well, Eisner did a book called Dropsy Avenue, which is about the life of a neighborhood evolving over the course of about 100 years. It's in the Bronx. And through the course of this time, the ethnicities that live there kind of move in and move out and change and flux. But he shows all the pitfalls of the racial stereotypes and all they hate each other. They keep hating each other and they keep repeating the same cycles over and over again. So it's really a very eye-opening story about prejudice and the external conflicts. I also like to teach a book called American-Born Chinese.
Who is that by?
Jean Lin Yang. And it's about a young junior high age Chinese boy who's moved to the United States. And this is also about racial prejudice, but in this case, it's very much an internal conflict. Yes, there are external conflicts that affect him that make him feel bad about himself, but ultimately this is a book about how he becomes overwhelmed by self-hatred and self-loathing because of who he is. Wow. He internalizes the prejudice. So I really like to actually teach Dropsy Avenue and American-Born Chinese in conjunction with each other because they really teach external conflict and internal conflict.
It's interesting because I know American-Born Chinese has been termed a young adult's novel or a young reader's novel, but that dynamism of the external world shaping your internal self and shaping a sense of self-loathing is powerful at any age. It's not just some topic for children. This is something that adults wrestle with, that everyone wrestles with.
Oh yeah, the first time I read American-Born Chinese was just a few years ago. I was not exactly in junior high, and I found it amazing. Some books just transcend whatever label you put on them and can be powerful.
So what's next in your list?
3 books that are really powerful I'll just kind of list together because there is sort of a reason to list them together. And that is Mouse by Art Spiegelman, a Pulitzer Prize-winning graphic novel, which many people have heard of at this point, about Nazi Germany and a concentration camp survivor. A Japanese manga called Barefoot Gen. It's a series of 10 volumes. We just read the first couple volumes, but it's an autobiographical tale of, he was a boy at the time who actually lived through the bombing of Hiroshima. Wow. And then later tells about, in great detail, every little thing that happened just before, during, and after the bombing. It's a very powerful tale. And then also a book called Persepolis by Marjane Satrapi, a woman who came of age when Iran became more fundamentalist in about 1980. So she was raised in a setting that was a little more secular, a little more democratic, and then suddenly had to start wearing a veil. So that changed her life. It was something to really become accustomed to. All 3 of these books, the reason I kind of lumped them together, is because all 3 of them are about people who are living in authoritarian societies. And it's about that individual struggle against that authoritarian society that they're in, whether it's Nazi Germany, World War II Japan, or Iran in more recent contemporary times. And interestingly, all 3 of these books, as serious as the subject matter is, the art style in all of them is really rather cartoony. And I believe that this is a very effective way to bring in a technique that could never be done in prose, to draw you in to these writers' and artists' experiences, where you feel the story more inside looking out. It's sort of that cartoony world in our head of how we all feel as kids looking out. And Scott McCloud actually talks about that somewhat extensively in Understanding Comics. And two other books I like to teach are Marvels, which is a book by Marvel Comics, and it takes the regular Marvel superheroes like Spider-Man, Fantastic Four, and it has a point of view from the average man on the street looking at them as if they're real. It's a very realistically sort of based story. And this man who's looking at them sees them at times as gods to be admired, at times to be feared, and it's sort of this idea of what it would be like if these superheroes were real. Another book that I like to teach, which is kind of similar in that it takes a fantasy sort of a scenario like that and treats it realistically, is V for Vendetta, a book which has become pretty famous lately as the image has been adapted by first the Tea Party and then Occupy Wall Street, V for Vendetta by Alan Moore and David Lloyd. And this is sort of the ultimate revenge fantasy, in a way almost responding to the authoritarian sort of governments that we had already seen in Mouse and in Barefoot Gen and in Persepolis, where it's a man who takes on an authoritarian government and tries to take it down. And in fact, he does, but there's a cost. And it's a very realistic angle on it. And interestingly, those other books that had the cartoony art, these two books that are more fantastic in their someone who takes on the authoritarian system about Marvel superheroes, they have very realistic art. And I believe that that is on purpose because it's a way to make the fantastic seem real. So the art choices of style are very important to all of these books.
Barry, it's a great point. So I want to wrap us up here. What would you say sums up your experience of teaching comics in the high school classroom? What would be, if there was a word you could put on it?
Well, first off, all these stories are about the idea in many ways of the individual and the society or group in which they live and the interaction. And that's something all of us can relate to, and it's where we need to start in our learning process as individuals. We have to understand our context. We have to know what helped shape us and where we are and where we're going. So those kinds of stories are important. Those kinds of stories are in comics, they're in literature, they're in poetry, they're everywhere. The other thing is the importance of just interpretation to make meaning. I mean, ultimately, knowledge, if you think about it, is really just detecting patterns, being able to make predictions. When you make a prediction and it comes true, that kind of feels a little bit like knowledge. It's like, oh, it came true. I actually know something. Then in the humanities, we like to add meaning. We'll interpret a meaning and try to figure out just what that knowledge means and what those predictions mean and what the patterns mean. Storytelling is a fantastic way to work with that. And in comics, we have a rich and imaginative environment in which to do so.
Barry, it's been wonderful talking to you.
Thank
Really
you,
a
William.
pleasure.
It's been a pleasure.
Thank you very much.
You bet.